Welcome to the regular meeting of the Morton City Council, June the 2nd, 2025. First part of our meeting, usually we have a space for public comments. Renee, do we have anyone who signed up for public comments? If not, we'll ask Chad to run the video, please.
Yeah, he did. He already ran it.
That was it, the whole thing?
That was it. We're
Okay.
good.
We'll move right into order, and I will ask Mayor Pro Tem Wendy Cato if she'll lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. If you'll please rise.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This time I'd like to ask Pastor Amy Kincaid from Boone MB Church to lead us in an invocation, please. Amy, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Let us pray. Lord God, we're just thankful for this day that you've given us. And I thank you, God, for just being who you are. Lord, I ask that you forgive us for anything that we may have done to prevent you from hearing our prayers. Lord, we thank you for this city that you give us to live in, to work in, and thrive. Lord, I ask that you bless the residents here. Bless the children, Lord, that live here, that they grow, Lord, and that we are able to pour into them life. Lord, I ask that you just bless our law enforcement officers as they surround this city and protect. Lord, that you'll be with them, give them patience. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Amy. I'd like to introduce City Council. To my far right, Mayor Pro Tem Wendy Cato, Chris Jernigan, City Council, Keith Rigsby, our City Attorney. I'm Ronnie Thompson, your Mayor. Sally Sandy, our City Manager. Butch McSwain, City Council, and Chris Hawkins, City Council. Renee Carswell is our clerk to the board, and for the interpreters for the deaf are Danette Stillman Bridges and Ernest Williams IV. We have some service pins we'd like to present tonight. Randy Carswell had 20 years in facilities maintenance supervisor. He was not able to be with us. But we have Kevin Woody, 20 years as fire captain in public safety. I'll ask Chris Hawkins if he'll make that presentation, please. Kevin, come forward, please.
With that service pin. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Under public advocacy, I'd like to recognize that the Government Finance Officers Association of the U.S. and Canada awarded Jesse Parrish, Director of Finance, with an award of Financial Reporting Achievement for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2024. This is the highest form of recognition in governmental accounting and financial reporting. Its attainment represents a significant accomplishment by a government entity and its management. Next on our agenda is a proclamation. Proclamation of for Juneteenth. Let's see if I can read that. Okay. Let's see if I've got it. I'd like to read that proclamation. Whereas on January 1st, 1863, President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, providing that all persons held as slaves within any state or designated part of a state shall be thenceforth and forever free. And whereas President Lincoln correctly believed slavery to be in violation of the principles of the Declaration of Independence, and that its abolition represented a new birth of freedom for the United States. And whereas on June 19, 1865, almost 2.5 years later, Major General Gordon Granger arrived in Galveston, Texas, and announced the end of both the Civil War and slavery with this announcement, quote, "The people of Texas are informed that in accordance with the proclamation of the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free," end quote. Whereas Texas began the celebration of Juneteenth in 1866 with community events and freed families immigrated from Texas to other parts of the United States, they carried the Juneteenth celebration with them. And whereas Juneteenth is the oldest nationally celebrated commemoration of the ending of slavery, and whereas Juneteenth is an important opportunity to join with people across the nation in celebrating the good news of freedom and the end of the evil of slavery, a bill was signed by President Joseph Biden on June 17, 2021, to make Juneteenth a national holiday. Now therefore, I, Ronnie Thompson, Mayor of the City of Morganton, do hereby proclaim June 19, 2025 as Juneteenth Day in Morganton, and I further call upon all citizens of the community to gain knowledge of and join in the celebration of Juneteenth in Morganton. Proclaim this second day of June 2025, Ronnie Thompson, Mayor, and Renee Carswell, City Clerk. I'm going to ask Chris Jernigan if he'll present that to Alicia Conley, I believe is here. She'll come forward.
It's a great honor to be able to present this to you again this year on behalf of City Council and all the citizens. And on a personal note, just to thank you for all you do to help us remember and to celebrate Juneteenth, and for all you do to make our community a better place to live.
Thank you. Good evening to everyone. To the Honorable Mayor Thompson, to the Honorable City Council, to Sally, City Manager, to the City Attorney, and to each of you here this evening. It is an honor to again accept the 2025 Juneteenth Proclamation on behalf of the Burke County NAACP and the community. Juneteenth is a reminder of the struggles and the triumphs of the African American community in their fight for freedom, for equity, and for justice. It is also a time to reflect and honor the past while celebrating the lives, the contributions, and the sacrifices of our ancestors, but yet looking forward to a future of hope and progress. But let us not forget the deep roots here, right here in Morganton, and the dedicated community leaders, the activists, the artists, and those community members who realize the importance of commemorating Juneteenth. Those persons who understood that Juneteenth was not just a moment in history, but it was a living, evolving testament to history, education, excellence, and unity. Juneteenth is not just a celebration, I say it all the time, for African Americans. It is a celebration for all Americans because it marks a turning point in our nation. It is a reminder of the need for all of us to stand up for the rights of every individual. So the Burke County NAACP will celebrate Juneteenth this year on June 21st from 10 o'clock a.m. until 4 o'clock p.m. at the Coma Amphitheater. And our theme this year is going to continue with celebrating our 90th anniversary. So we're celebrating 90 years and moving forward in equity, justice, and equality. This year we will celebrate freedom, resilience, and cultural history. We're going to reflect upon history, education, have fun with some great people, eat delicious food, enjoy good music, and we're going to put them boots on the ground here in the city of Morganton. So this Juneteenth, let us come together as a community and renew our commitment to celebrate diversity and embrace the contributions of every person in this city, this county, and this state. Thank you.
Thank you, Alicia. Next, I have a proclamation for Parks and Recreation Month. Whereas Parks and Recreation is an integral part of the communities throughout this country, including the city of Morganton. And whereas Parks and Recreation promotes health and wellness, improving the physical and mental health of people who live near parks. And whereas Parks and Recreation promotes time spent in nature, which positively impacts mental health by increasing cognitive performance and well-being. And whereas Parks and Recreation encourages physical activities by providing spaces for popular sports, hiking trails, swimming pools, and many other activities designed to promote active lifestyles. And whereas Parks and Recreation is a leading provider of healthy meals, nutrition services, and education. And whereas Parks and Recreation programming and educational activities such as out-of-school time programming, youth sports, and environmental education are critical to childhood development. And whereas Parks and Recreation increases a community's economic prosperity through increased property values, expansion of the local tax base, increases tourism, the attraction and retention of businesses, and crime reduction. And whereas Parks and Recreation is fundamental to the environmental well-being of our community. And whereas Parks and Recreation is essential and adaptable infrastructure that makes our communities resilient in the face of natural disasters and climate change. And whereas our parks and natural recreation areas ensure the ecological beauty of our community and provide a place for children and adults to connect with nature and recreate outdoors. And whereas the U.S. House of Representatives has designated July as Parks and Recreation Month, now therefore be it resolved by the City of Morganton that July is recognized as Park and Recreation Month in the City of Morganton, adopted the second day of June 2025. Ronnie Thompson, Mayor, Renee Carswell, City Clerk. I'll ask Councilman Butch McSwain if we make that presentation.
I saw Brian get up and get a head start, so I thought I better hustle low here. Of course, you know, I love recognizing you guys. I think this year particularly, everybody realizes how important you and our facilities are. And the job you've done overcoming and getting it ready is spectacular, and we do appreciate it. It should be recognized even more than we can during July, but thank you for everything you and your staff do.
Yes, sir. Just briefly, thank you, council, city manager. You give us the resources we need to run the programs to try to get these parks back open. We just ask the public to enjoy the parks that are currently open. We've got quite a few. Pools are open, splash pads are open. We've got sections of the greenway that have opened back up. And just be patient with us on what is not open currently and try to stay out of those areas the best you can. And we hope to, in July, have some updates regarding some of the other parks, that we might be able to open and allow people to come into those areas safely. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. For upcoming events, as Brian said, outdoor pool and splash pad opening, the College Street Recreational Pool, Martin Luther King Park Splash Pad, and Martha's Park Splash Pad are open. The 4th of July fireworks. A fireworks display will be held on Friday, July the 4th, 2025, with a projected start time of 9:45, depending on the weather. Fireworks will be shot from the grounds of Freedom Park. The park will be closed. The park will be closed to the public to ensure the safety of fireworks operators and the public. People wanting to see the fireworks should find parking in the parking lots at nearby businesses along Independence Boulevard, Wamsutter Mill Road, and North Green Street, or NC 181. More details will be released closer to the 4th of July. In downtown Art in the Park, June and July 2025, Karen Koval has a work style that is colorist. She creates in oil and cold wax, acrylic, collage, and mixed medium. She is based in Maiden, North Carolina. Our farmers market are open Wednesday from 10 to 1 at 111 North Green Street, and Saturday 8 to noon at 300 Beach Street. Our TGIF 25 free concert series, TGIF will be every Friday from 6 to 10 with music starting at 7, May through July, except for July the 4th. Third Thursday Art Crawl will be June the 19th from 4 to 7 in downtown Morganton. Under comma, the season and single ticket sales have been announced. July the 28th, you returning season ticket holders can purchase tickets. August the 4th, new season ticket holders can get tickets. And August the 11th, you can start buying single tickets. Under North Carolina Municipal Power Agency, Sally, do we have an update?
Nothing to report at this time.
Under consent agenda, we have 4 items. Would you cover those, please?
I'll be glad to and ask that you consider approving those in a single motion. So those are minutes from the May 5th council meeting, tax releases in the amount of $1,034.97, and then a budget amendment to accept an additional $5,000 in grant funds from Electricities in the Downtown Revitalization Grant Program, and then a requirement for every year to reappoint Jenny McNeely as tax collector and reappoint Emily Morgan as deputy tax collector. That is for the period of July 1 through June 30th, and to approve a resolution adopting an order to tell those ladies to do their job and collect taxes.
Do any members of council wish to have any items removed from the consent agenda? If not, do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Motion to approve?
Thank you, Chris. I have a motion to have a second.
Second.
Thank you, Butch. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Next is the presentation of our budget for 2025-2026. I'll call on Sally, Sandy, and any personnel that would like to speak.
I know you've all been anxiously awaiting and that everyone is excited. This is actually one of my favorite times of the year. So now I get the floor for just a few minutes. So we're going to talk about the 25-26 budget. And as you all know, for a lot of years now, more than I care to count, my budget message sometimes inspires a movie. And I like to give some quotes and things from a movie. Well, this year, and this has been an exceptional year in many ways, and you can define exceptional also many ways. The only movie that really stuck with me while we were working through all of this is the movie Hurricane Season, because that is what we have been living. And I don't know if you've had the chance to see it, if you have not. So the Sandy family, big fans of sports movies, true sports stories. We've seen them all 100 times. This came out in 2009, and it was a reaction to Hurricane Katrina. It's a true story, and it is about a coach who decides to restore normalcy in the only way he knows how, and that is coaching basketball. And he shares a message. The movie is about resilience, community, and overcoming obstacles when in the face of danger and really hard times. It's a great movie, and I think that you should watch it, and we'll come back to that in the end because I'm going to share a few numbers with you and then tell you how I think the message in this movie really replicates what we've been doing for the last months and what we're continuing to do. So you need to watch it if you haven't. So throughout this message, and I know you all, I got to give you some of the numbers, and we need to say them, and I know for some people it's too many numbers, but they're numbers that kind of matter. And you're going to hear a lot throughout this references to Helene, references to where we are in the community, and you've just heard Brian talk about patience and getting parks back online and that sort of thing. In this budget message, which I don't know how many pages it is, let's call it 16 or 17 pages, Helene is mentioned 37 times. And I think that is pretty indicative of how much the effects of that are still with us today and what we're still dealing with. And not just as a city, but individuals in our community and families. And that doesn't even begin to address the rest of Western North Carolina. So, $95 million budget. That's compared to one that is just over $106 million today in the year that we're in currently, and that's after budget amendments throughout the year. So it's about $11.5 million less. Why is that? because September 27th and Helene changed everything. We stopped projects that we had planned to do last year. We halted purchases. We started moving money into a hurricane fund, and we postponed things. You're looking at a pretty, I would call conservative budget when it comes to projects. There's some things that we're still doing, things that have grant funding, things that we need to do, some things that we are not. And so you're seeing a difference in those dollars. And that's so that we have the funding and the ability to continue the recovery that we're in the middle of. Capital in the budget is $24 million. Again, that is moving some of the projects that were in the current year's budget forward a year. And obviously, those keep shifting. Budget uncertainties. And we've had several over the last 3 decades that have had uncertainties. None quite like this one, I might add. We are seeing incredible competition with contractors. We are struggling to get bids on things. They are really busy. They only have but so much bandwidth. We are seeing lead times on getting things, still stressing how we purchase, and we're seeing price increases. Western North Carolina suffering from a lack of tourism revenue, the things that we're used to. Morganton and Burke County the same. From other revenues, we still have local businesses that aren't reopened after they suffered damages. We still have homeowners who are waiting to see what their fate is as we work through this process. And all of those affect our city and our local economy. One thing we are doing is continuing to fund our partnerships, our development group, our library, the airport, the COG, Greenway Transportation, and that is budgeted at $651,000 for next year, and that's equivalent to 2.6 cents on the tax rate. The general fund, where normal government stuff happens, everything that is not a utility activity, right? So that is $43.6 million. It is down about $4 million from the budget that we're working. What are our goals? To continue providing quality services, to continue investment in the quality of life activities. And that includes the rebuilding process and the rebuilding of our parks and recreation and other assets. We need to still attract new development and people. Because while we are rebuilding, it's still important that we don't forget that we have a future and that we have to keep looking toward that and doing the things that make Morganton the place that people choose to be. Biggest general fund revenue, the ad valorem tax revenue, projecting $12.6 million for next year. That's 29% of the revenues in the general fund. Recommending keeping the tax rate at 50 cents per $100 value. 1 cent on that tax rate generates a little over $253,000. We'll tell you that tax collections this year are running at about 97.5. That's low compared to how we usually do. We have definitely seen the effects of this last year in that number. We normally approach 99 or better. We are projecting the same for next year, that 97.5, because where we're having troubles, we don't see that changing in next year. The downtown service district tax, recommending that stay at 12 cents per $100. 1 cent on that generates $13,000. That is slated to generate $165,000 next year. Different story than citywide taxes. We are collecting about 99% there, our normal, and we are projecting that to be the same for next year. That number funds 21% of the Main Street expenditures. So 21% of the Main Street program is funded by this downtown tax. The other percent of that, which would be 79, 79, comes from general revenues. The ad valorem taxes we've talked about, sales tax, other city revenues that we'll talk about. Capital in the general fund, just under 16 million at 15.8 million. Highlights of that, and we're starting out with two things that were included this year that are moving into next year. And that's $250,000 for the zoning ordinance update, the process that needs to follow our 2040 comprehensive plan that we completed last year. $10 million, and it's the big winner in the general fund, for the new public safety station to be constructed on property that we swapped with the community college in the center of town over off Enola Road. That is slated to be funded either by state revenues, a borrowing, or a combination thereof. Stormwater infrastructure, a $650,000 stormwater repair using $500,000 in general money and $150,000 in CDBG money. The North Green Street streetscape rolled from this year to next year. General fund expenditures are $2.1 million, but $1.8 million of that is grant funding. And then the utilities have portions of that in their budgets as well. Purchasing new public safety vehicles, 6 patrol vehicles and 2 fire services vehicles, $616,000. Those will be financed with installment purchase. And then a sanitation truck in Public Works, $325,000 will also be purchased with borrowed money. Resurfacing is budgeted in there, and it's not on that list, at $600,000, which seems like a lot of money.
It doesn't last long.
And it is, but remind everybody that going rate to resurface 1 mile of road is about $335,000. So it will not go far. General fund key revenues, and again, sales tax is our second largest revenue, a little over $7 million. That is about a 1.5% growth over this year. For several years, as you all know, we've been having 10% growth. We've double-digit growth from COVID on. That day has come to an end, and we are now looking at something more like what we are accustomed to. The other ones there, the franchise tax, that's a state shared revenue. That is slightly up based on state projections. The solid waste is our $12 a month for sanitation services. We do not recommend that increase. That is the only revenue in that list that you have any control over setting a rate for or generating. Occupancy tax at $200,000. We are still seeing emergency workers and folks in Western North Carolina that have come from all over staying here for the rebuilding. So occupancy taxes have remained high. There is a concern that when those folks are gone and everything isn't reopened, and worse than that, people believe that nothing is reopened and they don't come, that number may drop, although we're going to remain optimistic. Motor vehicle taxes at $850,000, ABC revenues at $350,000, and then Powell bill, which is our state money that we get to work on our streets and to help with expenses. We're budgeting that the same as this year. That highly affected by the General Assembly. I will tell you that the House budget recommends keeping it the same. The Senate budget recommended dropping the state distribution of that by $50 million. So we'll land somewhere in the middle of that argument, I believe. General fund requires about $123,000 in savings to make that balance. That's well within your fund balance policy. It's following a year this year where even with what we've dealt with, we have put money into fund balance. That was a conscious decision once Helene happened, so that we would have that money going forward to help with the rebuild, because every reimbursement that we're getting is exactly that, a reimbursement. We have to spend the money first and then try to get it later. The water fund, total budget 9.1, almost 9.2 million. Flat growth in the usage of that. We are finally getting back almost to pre-Helene levels, not quite. The rise in expenses is definitely outpacing the rise in revenues. Recommending you consider a 10% increase on volume charges only, no fixed charge changes. That would become effective August 1st. So with the usage in August for that. Normal household, it's about $1 a month. Our water rates, even now, they are still very, very low in this state, which is a good thing. I will tell you that our neighbors, everyone around us, everyone is raising water rates. It is difficult to pay the bills. Capital in that, $2.5 million, highlights continuing to hopefully help with subdivisions with some infrastructure. We budgeted $200,000 for that. Line replacement and repair, $500,000. And then the chemical tank feeding system at $1 million to be done. Again, we're appropriating a small amount of retained earnings, which is savings in the water fund, and that's $29,000. The wastewater fund, just a little bit different numbers, but the same kind of picture, $8 million. Again, trying to get back to pre-Helene levels, very flat growth in usage. Recommending a 5% increase on volume charges here, again, effective August 1st. Again, that's around $1 a month for your average household. Capital of $2 million, some upgrades continuing at the treatment plant, $700,000. Line and manhole replacements out in the collection system, $500,000, and then $200,000 for the housing development infrastructure, should we be fortunate enough to get some new subdivisions created. And again, $26,000, a small amount of savings to make that fund work. We'll tell you that both of those funds, and what you're not seeing in these numbers, again, we're going to talk about Helene, are the big projects, and we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. So the large rebuilding projects aren't in these numbers. These are just, I would call it day-to-day, the things that we're doing normally. So they aren't in these numbers yet, but we'll get there. Electric fund. So, that's the big one. $28.5 million is the total budget there. Not proposing a rate increase. This would be the second year in a row of no rate increase. And I can tell you that is at a time that electric rates have been increasing all over the country. Setting up some capital reserve dollars, setting aside $600,000 for future purchases. Tree trimming contract, $225,000. A capital improvement plan, $2.5 million. The big part of that, $1.1 million, being electric's portion of the North Green Street Streetscape project. Park lighting upgrades at $250,000, and then continuing replacing our direct berry upgrades at some of our older neighborhoods and reconductoring some of that electric infrastructure, $275,000. It is no secret, we have talked about it, that, again, September, Helene, we lost every electric customer that we had. Our distribution system took a large hit, about $5 million worth. About right at $4 million was the cost of what we did with our crews and materials that we bought. The cities that came to help us and that sent materials, that's right at $850,000. So $5 million to rebuild that system. We are hopeful that we're getting reimbursement for that. We have not received $1 of that yet, but we do remain hopeful. And someday I'm going to sit here and tell you that we've gotten that money. Compass, so our broadband phone and cable TV, $6.6 million, so just under $7 million. We continue to see increases in our business and residential internet. Our managed product which is our business internet and business phone, highly popular. And the difference in that is, once again, customer service. It is a real person that is willing to come and sit with your business and work with you and get it working and to respond when you need help. TV is expensive, And we keep talking about losing customers, and we keep losing some to streaming, but we still don't lose them as fast as we thought. The charges for the Charlotte stations were in the second year of the 3-year contracts, and so they are increasing again. And so we're recommending at January 1 that we would have a $5 per month broadcast surcharge rate increase. So that really is for those local channels. And that makes that $30 a month in your cable bill. It's pretty high. But I don't see that stopping because there's no control over that, and they charge you what they want if you want to have those. We continue to work through our capital program. Next year budgeted about $900,000 to get set up for streaming. As you see, we have a purchase here for $75,000 for set-top boxes that would be for streaming our service, and we continue to work on that. We are using $176,000 in appropriated retained earnings here to make this work, but we've had a good year this year, and that is doable for us. I know last year I got preachy on my soapbox, and I told you that we're still working toward fiber to the home, and we are. And part of this capital is to get us closer to that. That does need to happen. And as we sit here today, our competitors, yes, are overbuilding that all over the city of Morganton, using the taxpayer money that they have been given to serve underserved and unserved areas. And we do not qualify for that, but it is happening on most streets in this town. And I'll be quiet about that, but it still bothers me. So, cemetery trust fund, that's, where we maintain the cemetery. Normal year, no capital there, just $26,000. Finally, our intergovernmental service fund, which is the IT fund, the warehouse and garage, those services that serve us internally. That budget is $3.7 million, a little over that. Pretty normal purchases there. You'll see that inventory purchases $500,000, transformers $500,000. That pales in comparison to the year that we've just gone through with transformer purchases. And then fuel purchases at $515,000. And then the capital in the garage is to replace the heating system over there. So ARPA, we are coming to the end of when we're going to talk about ARPA. And you'll recall that we got a direct deposit, basically, from the federal government of just over $4.8 million in American Recovery Plan money. And that was the COVID reaction. And that came with a lot of stipulations. One of those stipulations was we had to obligate and contract to spend all of that money by December 31st of 2024. That was last December. We did that. So we checked off the first box. Now we're under the second part where we have to spend all of those monies by December 31st, 2026. You'll recall that we could have basically supplemented salaries with this and all of that. You all decided, along with staff, that that was a pretty, let's just call it not the best way to make an investment and to make a difference in our community. And so what we decided to do was to do projects and invest in capital and infrastructure and things that contributed to the growth of our community. And I'm still very proud of that because there are a lot of governments across this country that used it to supplement, to basically pay salaries instead of using their current revenues to pay that. So with that, we have 2 projects still going. That is resurfacing from last year that did not get complete. Have we talked tonight about a thing that happened in September called Helene? And so we did not get our resurfacing done. And then the Highway 181 sewer upgrade, which is coming to an end soon, but we have $1.7 million in ARPA money in that. So what have we done with the other money? We've done some other significant resurfacing. We replaced playground equipment at 3 parks. We did upgrades at Mountain View Gym. We did some work on the sewer sludge system at the waste treatment plant, the wash station at the garage we used ARPA money for, and then some resurfacing at Freedom Park and the cemetery. So we really spread that across the community, and I think that's awesome. So there's that word again. So, Helene. Not in what we've just talked about. There are 29 projects that have been identified on our FEMA project list and have been given a project number. And that's estimated currently at a little bit over $45 million. There are 12 projects in category A and B, which FEMA calls emergency work. That's about $4 million. That is work that has been completed, that we have paid for. That's not the people associated with doing that. That's just the contract work and the debris removal and emergency work that was done. We have received a little bit of that money back, about $400,000, and we're hopeful to get the rest. Otherwise, we have 17 permanent work projects. It's a FEMA category. They're basically our capital projects that we need to do to restore us back to pre-Helene condition, and in some cases, to do that bigger and better. And by bigger and better, I mean more resilient and able to handle flooding in the future when we can make those changes and to do what we can to mitigate damage in the future. We have received $2 million in a cash advance from our property and casualty insurance company towards some of this work. We have received $538,000 from our flood insurance company for some of this work. And we have transferred $3.6 million from city reserves into the Helene Fund to help carry us in some of this work right now. There is still a lot to be done. And as we have talked several times, we are phasing these for a multitude of reasons, for money reasons, for people bandwidth reasons, for ability to get the bids done, to get the contractors in, to get the items that we need to do restoration. And we're looking at some pretty big lifts for some opportunities and rebuilding projects that we're going to be bringing to you in the fall. So we're working on that currently. See that last sentence on there? Successful rebuilding requires our fiscal management, prioritization, and patience, patience, patience. And that could have been bold, because patience on our part, patience on our community's part, and we just ask for more of it because we're working on it every day. There is a core FEMA team, I don't know what else to call them except for gluttons for punishment, probably because we don't have a choice, that work weekly with FEMA. And that includes Rob, Jesse, Keith, Russ, Andy, and myself, and our FEMA contractor, and our FEMA people. And then that is supported by all the department heads, all the superintendents, and all the folks out there who are constantly getting quotes, constantly getting information from contractors and everybody else to try to get to the end to where those 29 projects are in the pipeline, being done, completed, and ultimately, hopefully, paid for. So, 3% COLAs effective for all full-time city employees, July 2025, and a 2 basically had nothing. They had mud and they had water, still standing. And he went out and got them and put them together as a team. And in his speech to them, when they first got started, he gave them 3 things that he needed. And those 3 things are, number 1, execution. Number 2, cohesiveness. And he told them that was just a fancy word for teamwork. And I'm pretty big on teamwork. He told them you must learn to act as one unit on both ends of the court because one finger cannot pick up a pebble. So those two things, for me, they exemplify what happened. Again, on September 27th, actually a couple days before. In the execution of the storm, in the execution of the days leading up to it, during it, and after, the city employees did great work, amazing work. They rallied to the challenge, and they did what we needed them to do. Then came the teamwork and working and realizing that nobody could do any of it alone, and that continues today. And they did all of that with good attitudes. And I know we talked about that before. And they did all that by asking, what else can we do? Who can we help? How can we make this work? Number 3 is effort. And he told the boys, you will never have to look in the mirror and wonder, did you do enough if every time you hit that court, you gave it what you have. And that's what I've witnessed. And that's what still happens today. And some days, folks, it's pretty damn hard because some days you just feel like it will not ever end. And it will end, and we will be better for it. You guys did that early days, day after the storm. You showed up at the community house, and you started serving meals. You started talking to people. You started letting them know that you appreciated what they were doing. And that's pretty big. So you guys did pretty well with 1, 2, and 3, too. You continue that today because you're sitting here and you're leading us to the future. And that's big. So thank you. And I said I wasn't going to cry. Oh. So the other thing, the department heads, the city employees, they continue to do that. I continue to be so impressed by what they do. The budget they've given you is something that's workable. It's something that provides service to our community, is helping us to try to rebuild our future, but it's not breaking the bank. It's not asking more than should be reasonable to do that. To the group that helped put the budget together, so that is Jesse, Rob, Kate, thank you. A lot of decisions get made in this process, a lot of organization, a lot of numbers. And at the end of the day, they have to make sense. And for that group, I am very appreciative. So, what does this leave us? It leaves us with a roadmap to continue to make Morganton a city of choice. We started out before September 27th saying that was important, and that is still important. How do we do it? We balance our financial responsibility through our rebuilding process, and we don't forget our ability to move forward. We got to have that. We got to maintain financial integrity and capability to do what we need to do to continue moving in the future. Offer our services at reasonable cost, continue investing in our community, working on our master plans, utility master plans, rate plans, all the things that go into making us a city that has a future. And I'll tell you that we are going to do that. And when Coach Collins told his boys that they were going to do that, and he finished his 3 requests to them, he looked at all of them and he said, and you know, when we do that, we could have ourselves a great year, fellas. And I think that's where we're going. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to have some low points and some stressful moments getting it redone, but that's what we're going to do. And at the end of next year, we're going to be sitting here in a whole different mood. Now, that's all I have to say. That's probably more than I should have said.
Sally, thanks so much. I'll call on Jesse. Would you like to add anything to that?
No, I'll just echo Sally's sentiment that, this is a long process and we make it, and we are complicated for our size, and that's a good thing, but it really does work well because we have council and support, and we have each other's support. And honestly, I think we've proven that with this core team through COVID. We've had ARPA money, we've had now, a hurricane, and we really do just continue to prove what we are as a team and that we support each other and our community. And I think this reflects that. So we're prepared and ready to start a new year.
Jesse, thanks for your team. It's a great budget, and I think it does help Morganton move forward.
I hope so. So we need you to call for a public hearing on June 16th.
At this time, I will call for a public hearing on the proposed budget on Monday, June 16th at 6 p.m. in council chambers.
I'll make that motion.
Thank you. I have a second.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Okay, next.
Mayor, before we get into the next public hearing, last month, Chris had attended a meeting on the state level, and our finance department was praised. And I just read again the letter that was sent to us from a national organization praising Jesse and the finance department. And Sally, of course, with her background. But I just think the citizens really need to understand what we have here in this town. And thank you very much. I'll look at Jesse, but I mean it for everybody. Rob, I know you're still involved with it, and thank you all. It's just something we can't say enough about.
Good, thanks.
Thank you.
Next on our agenda is a public hearing and consideration of a proposal to rezone a 2.38 acre portion of 1807 South Sterling Street, 0 Sloan Avenue, and 0 Sterling Forest Drive. I won't read all the PIN numbers because I'll get confused, but that's our next public hearing. At this time, public hearing is open. Does anyone like to speak for or against this public hearing? If you'll come forward and give your name.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My name is Amanda Hodiern. I'm here tonight on behalf of the current property owner as well as the applicant, which is Terramore Development, who has the subject property under contract for purchase and is the instigator of this request. So if you'll just give me a moment, I'm going to flip over to my slides. I think. Okay.
Comes Chad.
He's coming.
I'm looking at it. I'm sorry. I don't know why it's not up there. Thank you. Sorry about that.
There we go. See it? Yep. There you go.
Thank you so much. All right. So as I was saying, I'm here tonight on behalf of the applicant, the current property owner, and as the mayor read, this is for a rezoning application. It's a portion of five different parcels that have been assembled, all fronting along South Sterling Street. Addresses officially are 1807 South Sterling, 0 Sloan Avenue, and 0 Sterling Forest Drive. And the total assemblage is comprised in 2.38 acres. So just quickly, I do want to take a look from a high level at the subject property. So you see the red dot in the middle of your screen. Again, looking at a high level, and of course, you'll recognize that South Sterling Street traversing diagonally through the center of the screen. Down on the lower right-hand side, of course, is the Interstate 40 corridor, the interchange there. And as you know, following South Sterling from the interstate on in, straight into your downtown. This is, of course, a major gateway into your city. It's what Google Maps took me to take when I drove here from Greensboro, along with most other travelers, I'm sure. It's what a lot of your residents do, I would imagine, when they need to leave town. So we have a major corridor here where people are moving, not only to get in and off the interstate, to get into downtown, but to get between major employment centers here in your city. You've got the hospital, the UNC hospital system, you've got the Broughton Hospital campus, and you've got all the employment opportunities and service needs associated with both of those major land uses along this corridor before you even get to downtown. So we know this is a major corridor. That's not my opinion, of course. That's language used throughout your zoning ordinance and your Imagine Morganton 2040 comprehensive plan. And I highlight that because that has meaning. Your corridor thoroughfares, arterials are a major aspect of your growth plans and your zoning controls. Looking again at this slide, I also want to point out what else we see here. Down there by the interchange that we looked at, again, bottom right-hand corner, we see a lot of the very intentional destination type of retail commercial uses that you would expect to see at a major interstate interchange. Hotels, Cracker Barrel, Starbucks, McDonald's, all the types of things that somebody may be looking for when they're traveling and want to pop off the interstate and grab a coffee or something to eat or spend the night. Similarly, if you're leaving town before you get on the road and you want to grab a coffee or something to eat on your way out of town, this is where you're going to do it. We expect those uses to be right there at the interstate. Also want to point out that we've got several other commercial uses you may know along this corridor, and we'll look at those as we get further into the presentation. But then you also see a lot of open land or undeveloped land, and you see some rooftops. So we've got a lot of land uses here, but we can really start to draw a pattern and see some consistent commercial transitions along that major corridor of South Sterling Street. So looking at the subject property, we've talked about the fact that this is just a 2.38 acre portion of the 5 affected parcels. So this imposes that assemblage carve out onto the total parcels. So you can see where on those 5 parcels the carve out sits. So not only does this show you exactly where it is, but a couple things I want to highlight about this is, again, its size. This is obvious and straightforward, perhaps, but 2.38 acres is intentional. And I'll continue to talk about this as we go. But when you need to curate a land use and a land use pattern to look for things like compatibility, scope and scale and appropriateness, a great way that you can do that right off the bat is size. By sizing something appropriately, we can preclude things that don't fit. So we wanted to create a size and scale that was appropriate. Also, where it's located, where it's positioned on this property. You'll notice that the only frontage, the only opportunity for access, ingress and egress is right there on South Sterling, your major corridor. So that's important because we're not introducing any vehicular traffic or ingress-egress points onto the side streets that are not improved for that type of traffic and that are commingled with residential traffic from some of the rooftops that you saw. There's not many, but there are some back there, and this separates those types of traffic. Also, there's some physical characteristics about these 5 acres. The property owner owns the whole 5 acres, of course, but when the applicant came in and looked at it and thought about what worked best, and as a professional developer looks at this, what made sense, what better positioned them for a feasible and viable layout, this was the portion of the property that made the most sense when we wanted to size it correctly, when we wanted to make sure the access was correct, and when we wanted to position it here in an appropriate fashion. So we're going to look at some of those physical conditions later. But the other thing I want to point out is that you'll notice, particularly in that back property to the far rear, I don't know if you guys can see the cursor when I move it, yep, back there, I want you to notice how this proposal of the subject property is ensconced within that remaining MID district. The rezoning request is to go from MID medium to HID heavy. And so what that does is it leaves a remaining buffer or transition area of protection around the change of use, so that you all, decision makers, neighbors, everyone, is you get a baked-in firm commitment that whatever happens with this rezoning will not expand to the furthest outreaches of the property. So it's a way to bake in a bit of a buffer there to help with some of the transitions we're going to talk about. And the same is true over here. All of this will remain MID, again, creating that we've created ourselves through zoning an increased buffer yard here. All right, let's look at the zoning pattern. You see the parent parcels, the entire 5 parcels that our acreage is carved out of, outlined in purple. I don't have the same GIS skills that your staff has, but I wanted you to see at least where the main parcels were. And this is a zoomed out zoning pattern. And you'll notice that we've got the darker orange or warmer beige, if you will, down again by the interstate interchange that denotes your HID district, your heavy intensity district, and that allows for those hotels. We talked about the Cracker Barrel, all the types of uses you see down there. Then you'll see, you know what's off to the upper left, that's downtown. Here in the middle, you see the special intensity district, the blue, that allows for the Broughton campus. You see some HID here to the south of South Sterling, which allows the commercial uses that you know and are familiar with when you drive up and down that corridor. And then to the north, you mostly see this MID. We've got some LID farther up to the north for some of the existing industrial uses that exist. So you've got a patchwork here. You've got a quilt, if you will, of your different zoning districts that really mirror and echo that land use pattern we just looked at together on that aerial image. So looking in a little closer, this is from the staff report, and here we do have the exact 2.38 acre carve out applied to the zoning map, and it's more zoomed in, and you see mostly MID on the screen. Again, this is a tighter view. However, your MID district, we're going to talk about this more in a minute, it allows for residential uses, commercial uses, office uses. It's a wide variety of uses, and so you see that. You all know this, traveling up and down South Sterling every day. There's a lot of commercial uses there. And so within this MID district, around our subject property, which is here, I wanted to look specifically at our neighbor uses. Right here, just to the south of us, in this little V here, is the antique shop and hair salon that's been there for a number of years. I'm not sure if you can see it. I think we've got the closed captioning over it, but that use is over 4,000 square feet. It's a multi-tenanted retail building, over 4,000 square feet, existing there in the MID district, non-conforming, I suppose, grandfathered, if you will. Up here, just off of Gant Street on this parcel, we have a landscaping operation. That use is just 1,200 square feet, but you see a lot of associated outdoor parking of commercial vehicles and such. You've got a bay here that opens for equipment or servicing, if you will. Again, not a non-residential use. And then just going in, continuing towards downtown, we have here a medical prosthetics building. You see it here at just under 3,000 square feet. So as you would expect, as you know from driving it every day, but it's worth kind of stopping and thinking about it, you see the corridor, your corridor, major arterial, your major thoroughfare where people are moving, as you would expect, has most of its commercial uses fronting on it. That makes sense, right? If you're a business owner, you want to be where passerby traffic can see you, where you're easy to find. If you're a person using these businesses, you don't want to have to meander all off the side streets. You want to be able to get to where you're going, do what you're doing, and then get back to work or back home. So it makes sense that the commercial corridors, the allowed commercial uses would homogenize up to the front of the road along the streetscape here. So again, that has a lot to do with why we have carefully carved out the 2.38 acres that we are interested in to mirror that pattern, to be small in scale, to be slid up to the road, to be affected by your corridor overlay district. We're going to talk about that. That's key. And to be non-intrusive into the deeper parts, the next layer back off these major thoroughfares to where residential starts to be more appropriate. So if we just continue driving from the interstate into downtown, following off the map we just finished, next to the medical prosthetic store is the Children's Home Society building. Crossing over the interstate, now we're crossing the interchange and continuing into downtown. Across from the Broughton campus, we have some apartments. Then we have this row of existing residential homes that are now all being used commercially. These are all insurance companies. I think there's 3 hair shops or salons and a barber shop. So you've got even your existing residential structures are being used commercially along this corridor for all the reasons we've talked about. Then you get to the gas station. This is a very heavy, intense commercial use. Your in and out vehicular traffic, we all know that that's what it does all day. In and out, get gas, get a drink, whatever, leave. You've got your ingress and egress point, one of them for this site, located right here on one of those side streets, commingling that traffic with your residential traffic. So again, that's to just show and exemplify and really stop and think about the fact that this corridor is very commercial. It's used to this type of coexistence of commercial uses and residential uses being used all the way from the interstate on into downtown. So that this is the land use pattern that exists and that informed the request that we have before you tonight. So let's look at that request now that we've done the little overview of the area. Again, it's 2.38 acres, just that narrow carve out that we've looked at of all the parcels. It's currently zoned MID, Medium Intensity District, with corridor overlay, and we're proposing HID, High Intensity District. I misspoke earlier, I think I called it heavy, excuse me, with that corridor overlay to remain. Again, that's very intentional, that's important, because that corridor overlay is a very important tool of y'all's entire growth scheme, zoning scheme, and development standard scheme. It's a big piece of consistency. The subject property frontage is directly on South Sterling Street. We've talked about that, accessed only from South Sterling Street. And the result is a narrow delta of change that we're asking for. Just anecdotally, I wanted to mention that Morganton, of course, the city of Morganton doesn't utilize conditional zoning or limited use districts. That's something a lot of jurisdictions do, where an applicant like us could whittle away certain uses out of a district so that you would be left considering a smaller universe of options. Morganton doesn't do that, so we had to look at a different way to curtail things and to whittle that universe down so that you all wouldn't be having to look at a full range of options of what could go here. So that keeping the corridor overlay and keeping the site small in size were 2 important ways that we did that. We'll talk about why. So why do I suggest to you that it's a narrow delta of change? First, I want to look at the difference in your MID district and your high-intensity district, the ask we've made. Medium-intensity district, these statements are pulled right from your zoning ordinance, is intended for a variety of uses, all the way from medium to high-density residential to low to medium-intensity civic, institutional, office, service, and retail. We saw that. That's what we just looked at. Designed to keep impact on adjacent residential areas at a minimum. Your high-intensity district, in contrast, or I'll say similarly, also looks at creating a wide variety of uses. It's meant to accommodate high-density residential, a wide variety of civic, institutional, retail services, and office along major arterials, which is where we are here, South Sterling Street, along a major arterial within the city to ensure that these uses are attractive, functional, and do not have harmful effect on adjacent neighborhoods or other commercial. So again, it's about variety of uses, and it's about making sure that they're not overburdening, over-impacting in a negative way the adjacent uses. So when we look at the actual permitted use table and what's allowed in MID versus HID, there's 34 additional uses that are allowed in HID and not MID. Of those 34, 10 are not allowed in your corridor overlay. So we get rid of those because we're keeping that. So now we're down to 24. Of that 24 that remains, 2 of them cannot meet your Article 3.4 additional use conditions. Those are your specialized standards for certain uses that say if you do this use, you have to meet these additional requirements. 2 of those can't be met here. And then another 3 are heavily curtailed by those. For example, outdoor storage, when you've got residential use or zoning around you, like we do here, has to be 50 feet away from any of those belt borders. So that's further tightening the usability where something like that could go on the site. Manufacturing, same thing. It has several spacing requirements when you're next to a residential use or residentially zoned property, which MID counts as, where it can be placed on the site, ensuring that it stays farther away. So that's important because your zoning scheme, your zoning ordinance is meant to be used in tandem with your actual zoning district, because the zoning is just permission to try. Right? After the district, you have to come in and actually meet the standards of your ordinance. So those are important to not lose sight of because they have to work together and they further curtail what can happen. And what your job is to look at tonight, because again, you have to worry about, and what you're here to analyze is what could happen. Again, I've talked about this before, but it can't be said enough. Consistent application of the corridor overlay development standards. These, I'm sure you all are familiar with. They're twofold in their utility. One is aesthetics. Again, this is a major gateway. We've talked about that. People up and down who live here and who are visiting. So the aesthetics need to be high. So this corridor overlay talks to things about street yards, planting yards, parking lot plantings. That they're all higher and more intense than what you can get outside of the overlay. Architectural requirements, the roof design, articulation. You have to have an articulated facade, which means it can't be flat across. It has to have depth to it. Fenestration, that means glass or openings. Again, so you don't just get one solid monolithic frontage. You need windows, you need breaks and breathability. All of that is really intentional and really well done on the city's part to ensure that the buildings that get built on this corridor that you all look at every day look nice and the surrounding landscaping looks nice. I said 2 points of utility. The other one is that it mitigates impact. When we have bigger buffers and they're planted more densely, that's mitigating the impact both to the public right-of-way and to our neighbors, because those are higher screening standards. When we require higher quality building materials and aesthetics, that's creating a situation where we have better architectural compatibility between uses, so that you're not getting, a metal building, let's say, next to a brick home or something of that nature, or a flat metal roof next to a nice gabled shingled roof. So that's how all these items work, and work to mitigate impact and lift up the qualitative aesthetics along this corridor. Again, looking back at the size, that was very intentional. That minimized scope of just 2.38 acres leaves that remaining acreage of the MID district all around this area. And it keeps a intentional buffer or transition area. So if we had zoned this entire thing HID, we'd be up here talking about the feasibility of that entire site, which is just under 10 acres, if I remember correctly. So this is a third of that. We've pulled it back in to keep it close to that frontage where it's controlled by the corridor overlay and where it's consistent with those other commercial scaled uses that we've looked at. Again, looking at feasibility and what can go here, helping you guys think through what could happen. We looked at those standards, those non-residential building standards that are required from your corridor overlay. Here's a multi-tenant retail building. I would guess this is probably larger scale. This looks like a grocery store tenant, but it can be compacted. If you think of a multi-bay retail center, think of your centers where you've got, let's say, a Dunkin' Donuts, a cell phone, Verizon store, retail fitness. That's your yoga studios or Orange Theory, some of those type of places that aren't the full-scale gym, a stationary cycle studio. Dentists, a lot of dentists now aren't practicing as a sole practitioner in their own office. It is a comprehensive Aspen Dental or UDA Dental you may see. They use spaces like this, these types of bays. So Firehouse Subs, these types of small restaurants and users that can't afford to go do a whole site by themselves. They need to be a part of something like this, and it's well done, it's comprehensive and cohesive, all at that high level of design that the city requires and to look like this. On the other front, a multi-tenant office building. Again, this is what your standards show as an example. You see all that breathability, fenestration, articulation, roof gabling, and interesting roof multi-levels that I talked about. These are just, illustrative manifestations of those standards at work. But these are showing us the type of development and quality that you guys want along this corridor, and that is the directive of what those aesthetics need to be. So looking at these types of buildings and how those things all come together, looking at the types of users, office users, retail users. This is near 2 hospitals. You can see this being a pharmacy, a imaging center, a pediatrician, orthodontist. There's all types of people who want to be on this corridor for the reasons we've talked about, all types of commercial users. And that works better, and it can be done more efficiently and at a higher quality when we put some of it together and create a critical mass and create these types of buildings that you look at here, rather than small one-off, anywhere from somewhere in the hundreds to 3,000 square feet of use that creates more of a ad hoc, piecemeal type of corridor where everybody's coming in by themselves. If they're under an acre, you don't do stormwater. Things like that, as opposed to if we get together, make a critical mass, do something that perhaps can be bigger of a footprint, and then not only are you having to manage all those development standards that kick in at more than an acre, but you're also able to attract a much wider range of users. So that's a lot of the feasibility that led my client to apply for this rezoning. The topography is key here as well. I talked about physical conditions of the site that led us to carve out that, and I said we'd get back to it, so here we are. This is zoomed in on this area. In red, I've called out our contour lines up closest to Gant Street. Gant Street doesn't touch South Sterling, as I'm sure you all know, but for purposes of this map, up by Gant Street is the high point. It's a knoll. It's at about 1180. As we follow the site back down to Sloan Avenue, or all the way back to that creek draw to the rear, we have an 80-foot drop as you go to the rear, or about a 40 to 60-foot drop as you head down to Sloan Avenue. So in other words, we've got some topographical challenges on the site. It's not one that's pancake flat that you can come in and make use of every inch of. So when you look at how to fit something here, and what size creates the best opportunity to deliver that high quality that the city is looking for, you really have to think about and work with the physical conditions that exist on the site, and topography is one of them here. So this is just a feasibility analysis. This is something my client developers do before they as they put a property under contract and before they engage in a process like this to ask for a rezoning. This is not what we're asking for tonight. It's not site plan specific. This is simply an example, and to show the reasonableness and reason for this request. So this is, again, just that 2.38 acre carve out. You can see the topography here. You can see I talked about stormwater devices have to be included, so you can see where we've included that here. At the back of the site, we talked about the fall. You want your water to run to the lowest point where it already goes. So that's making use of that topography instead of trying to work against it. Again, we had some significant fall coming off that knoll, so we want to put our driveway at a flatter point so we can meet your minimum specifications on those grade changes. So that needs to go down here. We need a parking lot and a finished floor elevation that's reasonably flat to meet ADA requirements. So this is just showing you how on a 2.38 acre site, if we're trying to do one of those multi-tenanted office or retail buildings, or even a user that needs a little bit more square footage than a Wendy's or a Pizza Hut, this is looking at what we can get here feasibly. And this doesn't even take into account your required 20-foot type 2 buffer yard. That would be required along these edges where I've got the arrows because these are residential properties. Your required 10-foot street yard. Your required parking lot standards. I've pasted the charts in here. Again, these are under this corridor overlay performance standards. They're enhanced. So all of that hasn't even been applied to this quick feasibility standard. So that this is just showing you how a site gets smaller and smaller, and the building envelope gets smaller and smaller as you be mindful of the physical conditions at play and the development requirements of your ordinance, which of course have to be met, or there's no approved site plan, no approved building permit, no certificate of occupancy. So now that we've looked at land use pattern, looked at the assemblage, looked at the curation of this request through size and scale, I want to look at your comprehensive plan. Of course, Imagine Morganton 2040, it's fresh and new. You all worked on it leading up to its adoption last September. So that's always great for someone in my position, in my client's position, because we know that the plan we're looking at and getting our guidance from is recent and fresh and real, and it's what you guys have actually recently analyzed and put out there as your message to the community and to would-be business owners and developers of how you want to grow. So when I look at a comprehensive plan, and I know you all will be looking at it, one of your directives under a rezoning request is analyzing consistency, and under the guidance of your comprehensive plan, we want to look at it in full range. And meaning, we don't just want to look at the future land use plan. We don't just want to look at, the thoroughfare transportation plan. We want to look at it at a macro level, and then we want to look at micro aspects of how this development request furthers or detracts from those big goals. So as I looked at your brand spanking new plan and tried to get a sense of what was important to you, here's what jumped out at me. The city of Morganton wants to grow. You guys want to do so intentionally. You want it to be managed. You want it to be thoughtful. But I saw a plan that was growth-minded. Your planning principles right here, these are just a few screenshots. Grow is the first one we see. Thrive. We see your path to your future land use planning talks about how should we grow, where should we grow. Your conceptual growth strategy talks about creating a system of nodes and corridors that direct and create intentionality as opposed to ad hoc or stripped out or piecemeal type of development. So I see right away that the city of Morganton is very thoughtful and intentional about how it wants to grow, and that makes perfect sense with that corridor overlay that I looked at and we just talked about, because again, that is controlling the growth along these corridors where this plan is directing it to go. It also jumped out at me that the city of Morganton is focused on housing. There was lots of mentions about housing in all kinds of places, but two I'll talk about here is your land use plan, your existing analysis here on the left. We can see that we've got just under 7% in multifamily, and we've got around 26% in single family, and under 1% in manufactured housing. So under 35% in your current land uses in housing. Compare that with your future land use classification summary table. When we combine the mixed density residential, the single lot residential, and the larger lot residential categories, we're up closer to 80% of housing land use. That's your goal. And I do understand that mixed density residential does include some non-residential uses within it. So we'll put an asterisk by my 80% number, but I think the point remains. This represents a big jump, a big objective to add housing to the city of Morganton. And then I also noticed, before we get into the future land use map, I also noticed goals about recreation opportunities, about multimodal transportation, that's walking and biking opportunities. Noticed goals about economic development. Noticed goals about improving access and opportunity to housing and social services. So a very holistic look at the community and what's important to the city as it grows. How can we also do these other things? So future land use map, of course, this is one way to start to direct some of that policy. So let's dig into that here. As you can see here, I've circled the subject area location in blue and drawn my little red arrow there to try and call your attention. That's that South Sterling Street corridor. You see that we've got red on either side of the site. That is your mixed-use land use category. And then you've got orange on the subject site and in a swath, if you will, along the middle here. That is your mixed density residential area. You've got blue, that's your institutional campus, that encompasses Broughton. And then as you proceed on into town, of course, you've got your purple that is your downtown, the light purple. So that's that progression that, again, echoes the land use pattern we looked at and echoes that zoning quilt that we looked at. So what you'll notice here is that, of course, the red, that mixed use is around your interstate interchange. That makes sense. We see it pulled up to the corridors in a lot of places along Enola, along the south side of South Sterling, the other side of downtown as Sterling heads out the other direction. So we see it along those arterials, those major thoroughfares, exactly as we would expect from the zoning ordinance. So drilling down, since we've got mixed use on either side, but our designation is that medium-density residential. Let's look at that, mixed-density residential. Let's look at the difference. Mixed-use land use category. The intent is to focus on locations well-positioned for growth and development with a focus on a mix of commercial, office, and retail use and multifamily development. So that sounds like your corridors. Again, Imagine Morganton told us to focus growth in nodes and along corridors, and to look at places where it made sense and is well-positioned. So that's where are people already traveling, your big corridors. Those ideas are layered and they keep coming back to each other. Promote coordinated master plan development of large sites to encourage a mix of uses in horizontal and vertical format. So not always do we get vertical mixed use like you see in downtowns. Sometimes you get it horizontally. In other words, you may have a hotel with some restaurants out front, a neighborhood with some restaurants or goods and services out front, single family with multifamily nearby. Horizontal mixing of uses just means that these land uses are placed adjacent to each other rather than on top of each other. And that's something that your growth plan, your comprehensive plan has made an objective. Enhancing the look and functionality of commercial corridors, we've talked a lot about that. That is already implemented in your zoning code through your corridor overlay, which again makes sense because you're directing growth to those corridors, so you want it to be controlled. Create and design a scale that encourages active living with connected networks. Again, that's that multimodal walkability that you talked about. So as we look at moving people on their bikes and on their feet, we need to think about where they're going once they start moving. We don't want sidewalks to nowhere or sidewalks that move people up to places where there's then nothing for them to do, meaning nowhere to go sit down and eat, nowhere to grab a coffee, nowhere to run that errand that you can do on foot or on bike. So we want to be thoughtful about making all this work together. And then when we look at the appropriate land uses, the ones that are highest here on the scale are office, retail, restaurant, and then followed by institutional. So mixed use is largely focused on those non-residential uses. So now we want to look at mixed density residential. That is that orange swath that encompasses the subject property, all the way right up to the frontage of the corridor overlay. So here we want to support a variety of housing types. We want to encourage increases in density. We want to consider land development code changes to reduce lot sizes and setbacks. Again, that's about increasing density and format optionality, and allow neighborhood scale commercial uses that may serve the wider community. And that's the big one I want to focus on. That should sound like an overlap to that mixed use category that we just talked about. And it is, because we see here down at the appropriate land use area, commercial and institutional are also appropriate land uses in this category. They're just small, they're just lesser down on that sliding scale. So it's not about is commercial appropriate here at all. The question is at what scale, at what scope, with what type of curation and modifications such that we can ensure that it's appropriate. So I would submit to you that comprehensive planning is big. It's 100,000 square miles looking down, right? And then as we implement, I heard you talk about you guys are going to be doing a new zoning ordinance that is meant to better implement your comprehensive plan as you evaluate development requests, as you think about amending your zoning ordinance. It's all with an eye towards how do we better implement these goals. Specifically as it relates to this request, it's about how do we better make sure that we are placing appropriately scaled goods and services in these residential areas where people can walk to them, bike to them, get to them, and how do we make sure our growth corridors are what we want them to be and look the way we want them to look. Just a couple of things here as we think about the comprehensive plan, not as a mandate, but as an advisory document. Sure enough, that's exactly what it says. It's an advisory document to guide these types of decisions. It expresses a vision. It doesn't change the zoning or dictate that zoning has to happen one way or another. It's meant to be a tool for you all to compare and contrast requests against and say, does this get us closer to our goals or further from them? And it acknowledges the fact that things need to probably change and adjust to stay true to these goals and objectives. An updated zoning ordinance, sounds like y'all are already working on that. Be nimble as circumstances change. So, it may just be that a changed circumstance is that rather than everybody being a standalone retail or commercial user now, we see these types of users preferring to group together in a 3 to 4 bay multi-tenanted building where they can all have a benefit and a shared economy of those larger costs of things like stormwater ponds. So in summary, as you all know, when you evaluate a rezoning, our case law and of course codified in 160D, you are required to ask, is it reasonable and in the public interest? So that's why we've been talking tonight about the existing land use pattern. The existing land use pattern tells us what's reasonable because it's what's happened before. It sets expectations. It tells us what can be compatible. Existing zoning pattern, again, that's telling us how things can fit together and how we transition between uses and permitted uses. Scope and scale, that's a big way to get at reasonableness. Is a 20-acre site of commercial in this location reasonable? I don't think it is. I don't even think the 10-acre site was. Again, that's why we've scaled it down to 2.38 acres. We can't prohibit uses here. We can't add higher restrictions through conditions. So what we can do is whittle it down so that the feasibility and the scale of what happens is appropriate. And compatibility factors. What can we control for? We can control for where our vehicular access is. We've made sure that's on the commercial major thoroughfare. We can control for what is around us and how close do we get to some of these other uses. That's why we have kept the MID around us. We've made sure that those areas of the site that are closer to some of our other users, neighbors, don't carry this zoning change. Consistency with the comprehensive plan, that's the other prong of a zoning analysis. I've talked a lot about that. I've talked about how we're evaluating here how your growth goals and objectives that are guided by that corridor principle and that node principle can be furthered with these zoning changes. We've talked about the strong objective to increase and improve housing. And of course, while yes, this zoning change to HID would allow for higher density housing and more of it, again, that is curtailed by the fact that there's only 2.38 acres here. So when you do the math, that again limits that intensity to what I would submit to you as appropriate. Also, we've talked about the fact that this introduces some different commercial and retail opportunities. However, again, by keeping it small, this is not inviting Costco. We can't fit that here. This is not inviting outdoor living or RV camper world. That can't fit here. This is inviting the types of goods and services that support housing, the convenient types of things that we all want nearby to our home when we don't want to plan a Saturday outing to a power center of big boxes. This is things we all need to do on the regular, and things that even if we don't live nearby and we need to come have our cell phone plan switched over to add a kid or fix a broken screen, we can do that conveniently along the major corridors. And then, of course, it meets the key attributes of land use plan designations. So yes, your current land use plan shows it as orange, mixed density residential. However, within that land use plan, we know that there is an appropriate amount of commercial uses that can happen there. So again, it's about scale, layering the fact that, okay, we know they go here, we know they've been happening here, how can we ensure that this request keeps it compatible with that scale and scope? So all of this works together to create a request that I submit to you and urge your consideration is reasonable, in the public interest, and furthers a lot of your comprehensive planning guidance. I also want to address, because it's in your staff report And of course, you guys are hearing this after the recommendation of the Planning and Zoning Commission. So there was a discussion about spot zoning. So I want to talk about that as well. So if I may hand this up and ask you to thank you so much. This is just a little digest of some talking points that I thought it might be helpful for you to all have on paper in case we want to revisit or dive deep into any of this. So the starting point of this discussion, again, from the staff report and from the the eventual successful motion at the Planning and Zoning Commission, was that this is spot zoning, meaning that spot zoning is by definition illegal and must mean that something has to be denied. However, spot zoning is not illegal in North Carolina, so we're just going to skip right over whether it is or whether it isn't, because that's not the dispositive question. We can, even if we want to, even if we all just want to agree that it is for the purposes of this conversation, North Carolina looks at rather, is it illegal spot zoning? So if we want to look at that analysis, we've got a lot of guidance to go on. So we don't have to opine or wonder or be subjective about it. We simply have to apply the case law that's evolved in the courts and has actually been codified into 160D at this point. It began with that basic rule that you've always heard, legislative zoning, it can't be capricious and arbitrary. That was all the way back in 1972, Blades versus the City of Raleigh. From there, our most comprehensive case on spot zoning is Chrisman v. Guilford County in 1988. That case, we're going to talk more about the definition and the factors that came out of that court's motion or opinion on that, but it led to the 2005 codification of a reasonableness statement. That should sound redundant to you, because I talked about reasonableness a minute ago. Why is that part of your analysis? Why is that part of what you're required to look for? And when you make a motion, why do you have to speak to whether or not the case is reasonable? That all flows from a case that was originally about spot zoning back in 1988. Because illegal spot zoning is a substantive due process question, it's a balancing of interests that looks at whether or not the benefit to the whole is lessened by a benefit to a few or one. And I'll talk more about that. But again, we're looking at, does this case harm or hurt certain individuals? Does it strip or restrict certain property owners relative to their neighbors? Does it further a public interest, a community-wide interest, as opposed to a private or singular interest? So the Blades Court talked about the zoning ordinance or amendment singles out a relatively small tract, talks about breaking up a uniformly zoned area so as to impose or take away certain restrictions that create a dissimilar or discriminatory treatment to one parcel relative to its others. It can be an initial or a subsequent rezoning, so there's no certain time that this comes into play. It's not about a specific land area. There's no exact acreage that is or isn't. There's no number, magic number that tells us anything. It's about relativity. Again, looking at the request as it relates to the whole. And it's about more or less strict requirements than those of the surrounding area. The quote from the Chrisman Court was, thus projecting an inharmonious land use pattern. We've talked a lot about land use pattern tonight. This is why. And it must be a zoning amendment to trigger it. So, of course, that's why we're talking about it here. So, in sum, the appearance of possible discriminatory treatment, be it positive or negative, for a few, rather than a decision based on larger public interest. So, from there, we have some validity factors. You can see it here, but it's the product of a complex set of factors applied specifically to the case before you and a fact-specific inquiry. It looks at the size of the tract. It looks at the compatibility of the zoning action with an existing comprehensive land use plan. It looks at the benefits and detriments resulting from that zoning action for the owner of the subject property, the neighbors, and the surrounding community. And it looks at the relationship between the uses that could happen versus the uses that are currently allowed. So again, this should all start to sound redundant or familiar, because this is all the things that we've been talking about. We talked about land use pattern. We talked about how to curtail it and make it compatible. We talked about how to mitigate the impacts. We talked about how to make sure that the request furthers and adds to the community rather than only furthering one or a few people's interests. So by ensuring that this is furthering the goals as adopted in your comprehensive plan of the larger community, we know that we have met that prong of the analysis. By ensuring that we are trying to bring goods and services that are already happening along the corridor, to the housing area, to the people in the places where they already are, where they're already traveling, we are looking at those factors that speak to the broader public benefit and the broader public utilization if this request were to be approved. And we looked at ways to mitigate those impacts, making sure we don't commingle that traffic, making sure this district doesn't bleed all the way up to the other districts, making sure that we keep those corridor overlay protections in place. So again, we've just a little bit finer of a head on this. Legitimate factors that the courts have held over the years since the 80s, physical characteristics like topo and road access are legitimate factors for a decision-making body to consider. We've talked about those tonight, how those factored into the making of this request. Whether or not there are land uses proximate or on the site that are different from the uses made of most of the surrounding properties. We've talked about that. We spent a lot of time talking about all of the other commercial uses that are happening both from a non-conforming standpoint and a conforming standpoint along this corridor right beside this property. Would the new use be in harmony with the surrounding area? I think I've certainly submitted to you that I think it is because of that compatibility, because of that land use pattern that already exists, because of the mitigating implements that we've put in place. Have appropriate safeguards been implemented? Yes, we've talked about that. And would this new use be in harmony with neighbors' expectations? Again, I will submit to you that I think yes, because this is exactly what is happening along that entire corridor. There is, I think I counted 3 residential uses as I started from the interstate all the way into downtown, 3 residential uses remaining that actually front that road. Again, even the existing homes have been turned into commercial uses. So I think this is exactly what folks would expect, so long as it's not overreaching, it's not too much. And that's why it's so important that this case has been curtailed, minimized, and scaled and scoped, packaged into something that makes it a very narrow delta of change. That makes that leap very small, manageable, and easy to control for. So your staff report talks about, it speaks to, I think, picking up on the motion that was voted upon at the Planning and Zoning Commission. It stated 3 things. It would be spot zoning. We've talked about that. Inconsistent with the expectations of Imagine Morganton. I've talked about how I think it's not inconsistent with those objectives, and how the motion talked about because the HID uses and permitted density and dimensionality would potentially have off-site impacts that would not be favorable to nearby properties and could have significant negative impacts on neighboring uses. So that's why I've spent so much time talking about how we're controlling for those impacts and how that permitted use table I talked about, we're down to just 24 or 22 uses, and they're curtailed by your development standards, by all the other things we have to meet. That helps you evaluate the fact that we should really carefully examine that. When you're looking at a rezoning request here that really is seeking to invest in your community, like we heard about in your budget talk, that's seeking to grow along these corridors and provide goods and services to the residents and to the people who travel these corridors, we really have to think carefully about examining statements like this and thinking about what intensities, what commercial impacts is this creating, rather than making these broad statements that may be true if there weren't things like the corridor overlay, or if there weren't things like the scaled down acreage of this request, or things like the development requirements in your architectural standards, all of these things that work together to make that statement something we really need to think carefully about. So I wanted to mention that because we haven't heard from staff yet, but I know there's some talk in there about the idea of introducing outdoor activity to the site that doesn't currently exist. Well, outdoor storage is controlled for in your development standards. We've talked about that. introducing new utility uses. I didn't see any of those, so I'll be curious to hear, interested to hear what those are. But when we look at your utility uses lined up in the permitted use table, by the time the corridor overlay is accounted for, there are none here that weren't allowed before. So we just need to be thoughtful and really examine these statements to think about what is it about this that's truly adding more negative impacts. We can already do a drive-through with a loud outdoor speaker and vehicles queuing in all day and night. We can already do a gas station with trips going in all day and night. We could do 3 or 4 of these if we did 3,000 square foot increments. So, it almost becomes a question of form over function. How do we better make sure that we're creating those goods and services in a horizontal mixed-use fashion? How are we growing along our corridors? And how are we creating that high corridor aesthetic that your development ordinance asks for in a way that makes the most sense? And I think that what this request is showing you is that we can do that better if we do it a little bit more holistically and take more than 3,000 square foot bites at it when we try to look at these office and retail types of uses. Thank you. We're here for questions. I do want to introduce, I've got one of the principals of Terramore Development, Mr. Daniel Almazan here. He works on site selection and these types of feasibility. Again, they build retail or office types of buildings that create a space that the types of users I've talked about can go into. So that's why he's here. That's why this site made sense to him. And we've got Justin Church here. He's with our our civil engineer. If you had any questions about the importance of that feasibility layout that I talked about and how that really does dictate and whittle down the universe of options that can happen here, how we got to that 2.38 acre carve out, he can speak to that. We're happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We are in public hearing still. Anyone else like to speak for or against this project? Okay.
I'm going to give you a bit of a breather while I switch the computer sections. In case you need to reference something. Okay. Thank you, Council. I'm going to try not to cover the same ground that the applicant has so readily covered on that, and just take you through a few of the summary of some of the items there. Chad, to bring up the location map. Nope, the one with the aerial photo. Yes, sir. Thank you. So this is you got the big view showing all the way down to the interstate and so forth with the applicant. This just zooms in a bit closer so that you can see the specific surrounding uses, the couple of smaller houses there on Gant Street, 800, 1,200 square foot houses that are located immediately adjacent to the property. The yellow outline is the rough approximation that, again, our excellent IT team put together of the outline that they had there. You can see the apartments down at the bottom of the hill, the Exhausted Rooster just on the other side of Sloan Avenue, and the single-family homes across South Sterling Street in that area. Those are the homes that the buffers that she talked about would need to be buffering against. While there's a bigger buffer at the back, it does immediately abut some of these existing homes there. Chad, the current zoning map should be number 2. Yes, so this is again a zoomed-in picture of that larger picture that was shown, so you can see the immediately surrounding area, even though I think the larger picture also gave you a really good overview of that the majority of everything in that area is in that MID zone, and are asking to change it to the HID zone in the middle of all of those other MID uses. So both along this side of the road and the other side of those. I won't go into the whole definitions of those. The applicants read those, but I will emphasize a couple of different parts of those definitions for the different zones. In particular, the medium intensity district is focusing on low to medium intensity commercial uses that are designed to keep the impact on those residential areas at a minimum, and that the high-intensity district is established to accommodate higher-density residential and those wide variety of commercial uses. The corridor overlay, it's noted that there's no changes proposed to the corridor overlay, whether we're in MID or whether we're in HID. You're going to have to do all of those lovely design features that the applicant talked about. So to us, that's kind of a moot point, because any development that goes there is going to have to do those things. I might just note, because it was mentioned several times by the applicant, about the access off of South Sterling Street, our planning design principles would say it would actually be better to take a lot of traffic off of South Sterling Street, I love that turning traffic, and to enter off of Sloan Avenue, rather than having multiple entrances and multiple accesses along that same corridor. So while we do intend that corridor to be developed, I know you guys have heard us talk multiple times about we'd love to have service roads along that South Sterling Street corridor so that we don't have all of those turning movements on there. So the fact that it's kind of in the middle of that section rather than touching Sloan Avenue, to us is more of a negative to that parcel than being on the corner might have been. But anyway, the intent of the corridor overlay is to establish that minimum standard development to enhance the appearance along those streets, but it does not restrict the uses or the heights or the dimensional standards in any way of most of the uses there. There are no permitted uses allowed in MID that aren't also allowed in HID. So everything that you can do in MID, you can also do in HID, but there are a lot of things that you can do in HID in that corridor overlay that you can't do in MID. And Chad, you've got those list of uses. So hopefully you can see some of these. I'm not going to read them all. There are about 20 of them. While some of them, like motion picture production or a crematory, is probably unlikely, hopefully, unlikely along this corridor. Some of those other uses are considered possible, such as that larger scale retail over the 3,000 square feet in one retail establishment, hotels and motels, nightclubs and bars, and those manufacturing and processing plants. I think the applicant mentioned that there were some restrictions in Section 3.4 on manufacturing businesses, but those only apply to manufacturing that's taking place outside of an enclosed building. And that would not be what we would be looking at here. You still could have a factory of some sort, though, in that manufacturing and processing section there on, in this section of the corridor next to those houses and things. Additionally, again, just hitting the highlights because you've got it all in your packet. Land in Zone HID can be developed with buildings up to 75 feet in height compared to that cap of 35 feet for non-residential and 50 feet for residential with all your performance standards in Zone MID. So again, we've got smaller single-family homes in that neighborhood. We've got a lot of smaller other developments in there. And there's a determined cap on how far that corridor and that potential for the HID or the higher intensity uses continued along the street. And Chad, if we put up the future land use map, we can show you what that is. That's the colored one. There we go. So the future land use map and the comprehensive plan that you guys spent 2 years discussing went up to the extent of where there was existing commercial on South Sterling Street, and there's a specific purpose behind that. So again, you recently adopted that. You determined that this mixed density residential neighborhood would extend across these parcels, and that the mixed use, the red, would stop before you got there. There were 2,000 some public points of contact on this. We had a lot of the input from the advisory committee. The property owner was on the advisory committee, agreed with these designations at that time. The mixed-use designation, Chad, you can leave that map up for a little bit. It supports a variety of housing types, but it envisions very few office, retail, restaurant, and other non-residential uses. It's intended to skew heavily towards the residential uses, and that commercial uses in that area were expected to be those smaller neighborhood scale uses. So Chad, if you can go to the mixed density and mixed use comparison slide. So again, mixed density here, you can see the mixed density area clearly shows that those commercial uses are less appropriate in the future. They're in the middle in the kind of purplish colors with the slided bars down to the lower part of the screen. Less appropriate in the future in the mixed density areas. While if we go to the next one, Chad, the mixed use areas, you can see those are highly appropriate in those areas. They've slid all the way to the top of the bar there. So the mixed density, go back one, Chad. This aligns quite closely with our current MID district, where we wanted to concentrate a lot of these residential uses and a few office and support uses to those, but not be heavily focused on those larger scale. Again, that over 3,000 square feet of retail, it is envisioned that when we look at redoing our zoning ordinance, that mixed use category will match what you have now at HID of retail over 3,000 square feet, but this mixed density category will stay at the under 3,000 square feet. That's how it's planned. That was how it was talked about when we developed the comprehensive plan, including the, so the example building that the applicant had shown, I don't have that slide, on their 2.38 acres was well over that 3,000 square feet, as well as the potential for those kind of hotel and manufacturing uses. The intent was to support in the mixed density residential neighborhood these small scale local uses, those dentist office, those types of things. This is in direct contrast to the existing development along the corridor. So while there are a couple of existing commercial uses, and the applicant showed you pictures of a few of those in that nearby vicinity of the site, those uses were all under that 3,000 square feet of retail uses. So you can, I think that just clearly shows you can develop these types of uses in the MID. If that's what we're looking at, those dentist office, those types of uses, those are already allowed in MID. You don't need to rezone the property to get those. If you're wanting to rezone the property to MID or to HID, as the applicant's requesting, then that planned in development on the site would need to be much larger than those existing type surrounding uses. Otherwise, there's no point in rezoning it and going through that process and, I don't know, maybe having a higher tax value because you can do more things on that property for that. And Chad, if you can go now to the comprehensive plan, the conceptual growth strategy image. So unfortunately, I think there's been a misinterpretation of the applicant of this portion of the plan, and that you will be familiar with because we talked about it a lot when the comprehensive plan was being developed. So when preparing that plan, we did set this pattern of development that we've got these major corridors and that we would like to activate those corridors and the development along through there. But we also acknowledged through our specific request, and one of the reasons that we engaged Kimley Horn was for the economic development studies that they could provide us that said there's not demand at this time and is not expected to be demand at this time in the next 15-year horizon of the Imagine 2040 comprehensive plan to support all of those corridors being lined with large-scale commercial development. There's just not enough demand for that. And that is why you see all these circles on this plan to talk about those nodes, those opportunity centers of where we'd like that development to be concentrated in the future. We've got a couple of larger areas, Morganton Heights District, every one of the interstate interchanges that we'd like to fill in the missing gaps in development, the empty spots there, before we just string development all the way along the corridors. So that's specifically why the plan was developed in that pathway. And we want to make sure that the plan and the decisions on rezoning continues to support concentrating those development and redevelopment in those opportunity nodes and understanding that expected economic capacity on the current horizon. So again, the mixed-use areas were drawn to concentrate, mixed-use, the red areas, to concentrate development on those areas that was already developed that needed redevelopment, and a conscious decision not to have that piecemeal development interspersed in that mix of the single-family, small-scale neighborhood development in there. Definitely agree with the applicant on the need to provide for those spaces, but this area is not those spaces. We've designated areas where those spaces should be, and it's in direct contrast to that. So concentrating the larger development areas in the certain areas, leaving the neighborhoods to develop for the residential and neighborhood uses. The plan's only been in place for 8 months. So while we definitely acknowledge, again, that goal or strategy that was in the plan to reevaluate the plan. 8 months might be a little too soon to do that. It was a midterm goal. That was a 3 to 5 year goal out there. We definitely wouldn't look at revisiting this probably before 5 years of that unless there was some kind of other global financial crisis, some type of point of that piece, or some other information that comes to place. And the request for one development here is probably not that. I can't really, we haven't had time for any substantial economic development changes that would necessitate review of the plan at the moment. The rezoning of just that 2.38 acres in the middle of the MID, that breaks that pattern that was intentionally set by professionals developing your plan, the community members, yourselves. Having an area in the middle of HID in the middle of MID, quite unusual and generally not recommended by planners, particularly when it's not in line with your comprehensive plan. Again, that's why it's a bit confusing that the applicant's saying they're supporting the comprehensive plan, but then asking us to change it already. The applicant already also mentioned spot rezoning, and since there was some information passed out, which I received a copy of when it was passed out there, but I would like to just make a couple of points in relation to that because it's a term that maybe you guys have heard and I don't know if you're familiar with or not. So typically, a summary of that might be the individual rezoning of an area of land that's surrounded by area in another zone is what's commonly referred to as spot rezoning. That's a very simplification of that. Generally strongly discouraged by planners because you're trying to create a pattern, not, oh, we'll just do this spot, we'll just do this spot over here. As mentioned, there are several legal tests for whether or not a rezoning is a spot zoning, and we believe that this proposal here does meet many of those standards. I'm going to just summarize what some of those are without referencing the exact legal cases. But a smaller tract, more likely to be a spot zoning. At the applicant's own acknowledgement, they've intentionally reduced the size of the parcel to be rezoned to not connect it to the surrounding area that could be rezoned to HID. The tract to be rezoned must be considered in relation to the vast majority of the land immediately around it. That's the legal test. And all of that land, as you've seen repeatedly, is MID, not the HID. It must be evaluated against the comprehensive plan. We've talked about how that proposal does not fit into the larger context of rational planning for the community due to the specific desire we had to concentrate the higher intensity uses in those existing HID areas, in those opportunity centers, at the opportunity nodes in the plan, and the areas that would be designated as future mixed use. Another point is that there are no discernible reasons to single out this small 2.3 acre tract for differential zoning treatment. Again, we've noted it has access to South Sterling Street, but so do dozens of other properties. That's not something that makes it special. It makes it essentially similar to the other properties in zone MID around it. So it's not really a reason for zoning this property differently to all the other MID properties that are along South Sterling Street and some of our other corridors. Another test, and the final test I'll talk about, is who is benefits or who is harmed. So the owner will benefit, but the owner still has use of the property for a range of other uses and can still profit from the property being developed, as has been shown multiple times through the other properties that are developed with commercial or with residential uses along that corridor. The owner would not be seriously harmed if the rezoning is denied. There's still a range of uses. As we said, there's only about 20, and a lot of those are maybe unlikely if it was still remained MID. Now, will the neighbors be harmed or benefit? There's probably an opportunity for either, depending upon what the ultimate use of the site is, but we don't know that right now. So we have to look at what we do know could be possible on that site. Specifically, however, the legal standards set up that the benefits to the community must be real and substantial, not merely convenient. So it's unclear to me what those larger benefits to the community may be, if any, when there are plenty of areas of HID land that is available for use that we still have that's not developed, that the proposed uses that they're talking about here could go on, some of which are in very close proximity to this site that are vacant or undeveloped or could be redeveloped for that. Staff code concerns that the potential for the larger scale commercial uses don't fit with that local neighborhood and that the potential building scale up to 75 feet high is dramatically out of scale with that surrounding existing neighborhood. Even if you went to the exhausted rooster parcel, at least there's not really anybody behind it on that side. For more piecemeal development, higher intensity community commercial uses spread throughout that corridor could lead to disjointed development and lack of achievement of the current comprehensive plan claims to develop the opportunity nodes. If you can picture, if we just said, okay, anywhere along Jamestown Road or along West Fleming Drive or along Sanford Drive, we'll just start putting these pockets of HID, you're never going to get your opportunity corridors or your opportunity centers developed, because you're going to have this low scale, high scale, low scale, high scale development, this stuff in the middle of neighborhoods. Where are your neighborhoods anymore if they're broken up by these larger pieces of development, whether they are manufacturing or whether they're just 5,000 square feet of retail? That cohesiveness is damaged there. And it, more importantly, damages the aims of this comprehensive plan that you worked really hard to put together, and again, that the community worked really hard to put together, and that we didn't have any comments on at the time that we developed it, throughout the development, about where these areas should extend to or not. So the lack of achievement of the current comprehensive plan aims to develop those opportunity nodes, and when there's a greater economic demand in the future to fill in between, is a concern that we have for those. That's kind of the spot rezoning summary of maybe how it doesn't fit those uses. To summarize and end up, there was one public objection received to the application by email, which states, I'm just going to read it. Hello, please do not put a Dollar General store on South Sterling Street. There are enough of them in Morganton. Please put in a retail or service that would add to the quality of downtown Morganton. Thank you for reading my note. I'm not talking about what the use is of the property. We are not making a decision on the use of the property tonight, so we'd like to make that clear, but did want to make sure that that person's view had an opportunity to be heard. Planning and Zoning Commission evaluated the application, and they determined to recommend to you to deny the application with a vote of 6-3. To approve the application, state would require council to make a formal statement that the decision is inconsistent with the comprehensive plan, and this would trigger a change in that future land use map to something that would cover those uses, so that orange area for that 2.38 section would become red. Additionally, if you determine to approve the application and consider that it may be a spot zoning, the courts have held that there needs to be a statement of reasonableness by the council that specifies in some detail the basis for that decision and the information that was put before you, before the board, to support that conclusion. That would need to be in any motion that you would do to approve the application. However, it does remain the staff and the Planning and Zoning Commission's formal recommendation to council to deny the application because of all the reasons that I won't repeat right now, but economic development or comprehensive plan goals being the main portions of those.
Wendy, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We still are in public hearing. Anyone else like to speak for or against this proposal? If you'll come forward and give us your name.
Good evening. My name is Daniel Almazan. I work with Terramore Development. I thought perhaps, because obviously council has been given quite a bit of information this evening, I thought I might just simplify this because I think actually Wendy made some great points, and I think in some ways, I think it will cut to the point of all of this. Whenever Ms. Sandy was talking about the budget, it really resonated with me because everything has gone up. Everything has gotten more expensive, more complicated in order to get the job done. And you know, Ms. Smith correctly confirmed that with MIB, we've got a limitation of 3,000 square feet. And I'm assuming that council is very familiar with the topography of the site. I mean, obviously, we pulled it up, and there's a difference of 80 feet from beginning to the end of it. And in fact, Ms. Smith also correctly stated that the owner who helped on the 2040 plan, he's a developer. And he's owned the lot for quite some time. And the question is that why hasn't he developed it? Well, let me simplify that for you. It's because it's hard to develop. It's because it leans back so far that even doing a smaller footprint with the requirements of ingress, egress, and even the size envelope of that makes it complicated in order to build and put retaining walls for such a small footprint. It's not economically feasible. And so then you're left with options of how do you make it economically feasible? Can you get smaller sites? Absolutely. What we've done is we've got a footprint of about 10,000 square feet, which gives us a lot of options, whether it be one larger tenant or, better yet, maybe some smaller tenants, several 2,000 square foot bays, gives us that opportunity to serve those smaller, different types of uses that may fit better with the community, but it also gives us the additional land in order that we can do the parking, we can do the landscaping, and then because you've already seen the unusual shape of even the subdivision that we've chosen the flattest piece that there is, but in order to even make that work, we had to add yet another acre, not just for water retention, but because of the dead space, because of the odd configuration of it. And then we also had to work with the fact that the topography is so bad, we had to stair step so that we didn't have to create another retaining wall just to house the water retention. So with that, we've got another acre. So obviously, we didn't want to come with an application for 2.3 acres. We would love to come in for less than an acre because we don't want to do water retention, but unfortunately, the footprint is what it is, and that's also the reason why we couldn't come off the side street. We would have loved to come off the side street, but it drops down too far, too fast. And so we're doing the best that we can, and to again reinforce what Ms. Smith was talking about was that she basically asked, why would we look at this site any different than any other MIB site? And I'm sorry, MID site. And what's the differentiation? The differentiation and what makes this unique is because the property is very unique. It's unusual. It's unbuildable in many regards. This is one way that we can do that. That's why we're here with our application. And I'm hoping that I could simplify some of this to sort of like cut through to explain why we're doing what we're doing. And if you have any questions, I'm here. And thank goodness our engineer's here because he could explain that a lot better than I did.
Daniel, thanks for that clarification.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else like to speak? If not, public hearing is now closed. Okay. Council, we've heard lots of information. What is the wish of council? And you were given a handout before for possible motions. So I guess in comments, we'll just go ahead and have comments. I'm concerned that it would allow buildings up to 75 feet in height. I just don't think that is conducive to that piece of property, but it is a unique piece of property. I'll agree with Daniel. It is a very unique piece of property.
Maybe I'm oversimplifying it, but in the slide that gave the things that were allowable in HID that aren't in MID, in my opinion, very few, if any of those things seem compatible to the properties that were contiguous to that parcel. So based on that, and we're not deciding on what goes there, it's just what's zoned.
Right.
So
And any of
based
those
on
would
that,
be allowed.
yeah.
Right.
So that was, maybe I'm oversimplifying it, but in just looking at zoning, those 20 additional uses didn't seem very compatible with what was already there. So,
Can I ask the attorney a question?
sure.
Would doing something like this set a precedent that we would have to face for other MIDs that may not have the same contour of land or whatever, but, we.
That's
might
tough
be
to
closer.
answer because you just have to evaluate each
Each.
application on its own. So I wouldn't want to say yes to that.
Okay.
Butch, any questions, concerns?
Yeah, my only thought is that we just went through the process involving a lot of people. And this is a quick change to what was decided then, and that does bother me. It's very well presented. It's certainly very well presented.
Wendy, any concerns on your part?
It's a quandary. It is a quandary. I respect two groups, the group that developed our 2040 plan, and I respect the planning and zoning group and how they thought about the process. I respect the difficulty of that property and developing it, kind of thing. What worries me the most is that the request could have included, because when we rezone, we're not rezoning for a specific purpose, a project. If the rezoning had been continuing the HID from our plan, a request to continue that further up on Sterling, it might have made sense for me, but to leave that small portion that's MID, which is close to the HID, and then all of a sudden switch to HID is, instead of just extending it and meeting our HID planning area. That is a difficult piece of land, a difficult piece of property.
I'm gonna make a motion to deny the rezoning on 2.38 acre portion of 1807 South Sterling Street, 0 Sloan Avenue, and 0 Sterling Forest Drive, PIN 270380589, 27038058984, 27038171000, 27038170001, and 27038163998 from medium intensive district to high intensity district, which is consistent with the expectations set forth in the Imagine 2040 Comprehensive Land Use Plan. That's my motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, motion passes. Okay, next on our agenda is consideration of adopting an ordinance to amend the City of Morganton Code of Ordinances to establish the downtown social district. I'll call on Mackenzie, please.
All right. Hello.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you. All right, so good evening. Before I begin the presentation that I have prepared, I just want to point out that we have a new Downtown Morganton logo. So we have rebranded. Chad, if you'll go to the next slide. Perfect. I'm excited to announce that we have our new downtown logo. This new logo will help us consistently showcase and brand our downtown. The stamp icon within the logo is versatile and can be adapted for various Main Street events, different seasons, and to feature different symbols representing our downtown, like you see with Table Rock and the Water Tower and so on. You'll notice that the colors and font of this new logo are consistent with the Downtown Morganton Social District logo, which you can see on the right side of the screen. Now let's delve into the Downtown Morganton Social District. First, some background. The North Carolina General Assembly authorized social districts in 2021, which allows local governments to designate specific areas where alcoholic beverages purchased from participating ABC permitted establishments can be consumed. Downtown Morganton is proposing to establish such an area to be known as the Downtown Morganton Social District. The basic function of this social district is straightforward. It will permit patrons to purchase alcoholic beverages in designated cups from participating downtown businesses such as bars and restaurants, and then consume them within defined common areas. We are seeking your approval for the maintenance and operations plan for the downtown Morganton Social District. This plan outlines how the district will be managed and maintained, and some key components of this plan include, if you'll go to the next slide, the map boundaries. The plan features a map which is in Exhibit A of the maintenance and operations plan, which precisely defines the geographical area of the social district. This encompasses some of the CBD and extends to the cigar club to include them. It is not the entire CBD. Right now, it is just what we thought necessary, and can always be amended with council approval in the future and submitted to the state. The days and times of operations are proposed to be Sunday through Saturday from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. So there's consistency across the board for patrons, and they don't have to wonder what day and what time are they allowed to use the social district. Inter-premise carry. The district will allow patrons to carry alcoholic beverages purchased from one participating ABC permitted business into another participating business within the social district, provided the beverage is in a designated social district cup. If you'll move on to the next slide. For signage, participating businesses will display standardized window signs indicating whether beverages are welcome, sold here and welcome here, no beverages are sold here, and no outside beverages. So those are the four categories. It's just like a 5x5 window sticker that will stick to the windows so everyone knows where they can and cannot enter and can buy and cannot buy social district beverages. If you'll go to the next slide, these are signage options that will go inside businesses that are ABC permitted. So there's always information about what this is, what I can do with it, a QR code to take you to the website to give you more information, at the register of places, hanging on the wall in places. Not a ton of them, just one or two in the businesses and obvious areas so everybody knows what to expect and can learn about the social district. And on the next slide, we have boundary signage. So just small but readable signage along the boundary lines of the social district so everyone knows where to stop and dispose of their cup before exiting the district. So when you come in, there's required signage with all of the required wording and a QR code to take you to the map so you know what to expect when you're entering the social district, emergency numbers to call and things like that. And then on the other side is the exit sign so you know when to dispose of your cup and that you're exiting the social district. And the next slide. There will also be public property signage. So public property is off limits in the social district unless otherwise noted. So these signs will help note that. So for example, we try to make the Sterling Street alley an active third space with tables, and we try to beautify it. And so that will be a space that will encourage people to hang out. The courthouse square, unless otherwise noted by an event that does not want it there, which is indicated on the sign. And the public park, as long as it's a public park on West Union Street, are examples of those spaces that will have signage. And the next slide. The cup design, the plan outlines a standardized design for the social district cups. This is an example. I would order these labels and order plain cups and then distribute them to the businesses with their own logo, and then the rest of it would be consistent with our logo, a QR code to our map and our information. So it's in their hands, and then every time they purchase a drink, it is dated and timed. So if there's ever a question about where they got the drink and when they got the drink, it can be looked at and disposed of if need be. For sanitation, trash receptacles will be conveniently located throughout the district to ensure cleanliness. For special events, the plan addresses how permitted special events held within the social district can participate. If they apply and are approved, they are allowed to participate, so it can kind of mingle together and benefit both. And for enforcement, the plan outlines contact information for reporting violations to Morganton Public Safety and the North Carolina Alcohol Enforcement Division. Now let's talk about the why. Social districts have proven to be highly beneficial for economic vitality. This initiative is strongly supported by the Main Street Advisory Board, who recognize its potential to boost sales for businesses because they encourage people to linger longer in downtown areas, allowing them to sip and stroll between different establishments. This directly translates to more customers for breweries, restaurants, and even retail shops, as patrons might decide to browse or make impulse purchases while enjoying their beverage. Many North Carolina towns have reported increased sales and new sales that wouldn't have occurred otherwise. And for example, the Madness had a 45-minute wait tonight, and so we had a couple that went to a brewery in town and got a drink and wished that they could walk around with it and explore downtown, even if no other businesses are open, if not just to walk around and make sure they could finish their drink, maybe even on their way back when their table was ready. Social districts can also attract new businesses, making Morganton more appealing to those looking for a dynamic location, thus further diversifying our local economy. They also support existing businesses by offering a competitive edge, allowing Morganton to keep pace with other growing downtowns in North Carolina that have successfully implemented social districts. Furthermore, social districts enhance special events such as our Third Thursday Art Crawls and the Morganton Festival. A social district can seamlessly integrate with these events, enhancing the attendee experience and potentially increasing participation and revenue for vendors and for our local businesses. We've seen positive results in other surrounding and similar cities that have established social districts. For example, Mount Airy's Market Street Arts and Entertainment District, their social district, has reported a 30% increase in retail sales across the district, with breweries specifically seeing a 42% sales increase. While specific sales figures for individual businesses in Hickory aren't widely published, the city of Hickory has reported a 16.8% increase in downtown core traffic over 3 years since their social district and other revitalization efforts. This increased traffic is a direct precursor to increased sales for businesses, as they noted that their social district helped make downtown a regional magnet for shoppers. In closing, I believe the Downtown Morganton Social District will be a significant asset to our community, fostering economic growth and enhancing the downtown experience. We are confident that this plan will allow for a well-managed and enjoyable social district. So thank you for your time and consideration, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Mackenzie, thanks so much. City Council really appreciates pictures. It helps us a whole lot to see a picture of what's happening. Council, do you have any questions for Mackenzie? One question I have, I know we serve drinks, or drinks are served on the courthouse square. They would obviously have the cups on the Friday nights that we have. And some merchants, I think, are concerned that they might have a liability. I guess they have the liability anyway if they're drinking, people are drinking at one establishment and then come into another establishment to have an additional beverage. The insurance liability, I guess, is what I worry about. And I've talked to our city attorney. That doesn't matter whether it's in a social district or not, correct?
Yeah, I think what you're talking about there would be what they call dram shop liability, and that focuses on whether someone gets served alcohol when they're visibly intoxicated or a minor. Obviously, the serving of the alcohol should probably not occur in those situations, and if the establishment did serve to somebody who was visibly impaired, they could be subject to liability if something were to happen later. That is kind of irrespective of the social district. That's just liability that an establishment might incur based on that type of circumstance.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mackenzie?
Well,
Chris?
Go right ahead.
Well, just the question of, this is a trial basis, it's been proven in other areas, but if it isn't working in the Main Street office, that's just something that we can discuss and maybe rescind in the future. I mean, it's kind of like a pilot program for us at this point in time, correct?
Yes.
Chris?
Yeah, I guess I see this and view this a little differently. Just personally, in my opinion, I don't see much of an economic impact on a lot of businesses. I could certainly see the breweries benefiting from this, but a lot of the other stores, I just don't see that being a tremendous impact. Conversely, I guess I have a lot of safety concerns, since the consumption of alcohol has the potential to impair someone's judgment or their actions. I worry about, pedestrian safety. We have so much busy traffic downtown in Morganton. It's tricky to navigate sometimes on any day, much less having that factored in. concern on whether an increase in the number of people participating will increase the number of folks driving after drinking. You know, that's a big concern for me. I know we currently have open container laws in place to minimize the risk of public intoxication and disorderly conduct. And I know those are in place for that reason. Another issue kind of tying to what I think was discussed there is I think we'll have a reduced capacity to monitor how much someone is consuming, because once they leave an establishment with a cup, nothing prevents them from bringing something themselves in their car and consuming that. And I don't know how that relates to liability on who has the last sticker on that cup. You know, Keith or some others may have the answers to that. I also think it may have the potential to increase the burden on public safety, and we know that their plates are full as it is, and so that's a concern I have. I just think anytime you combine increasing mobility with anything that has the potential to impair someone's actions or judgments, that causes great concern. And I've always been for things, since I've been on council, to help our downtown. I always have, to support our businesses and downtown businesses. But for me, in weighing the pluses and the minuses, I just don't think, I think the potential consequences outweigh any benefits. And for that reason, I won't be in favor of this. But thank you so much for all your research and information. I do appreciate that. Thank you.
Butch?
The most obvious concern I have is the festival. You get those streets slammed full of people and people walking around with alcohol. I mean, I am concerned about the effect it could have there. Now, on the same side, I have talked to a friend of mine who has a restaurant. He wishes he was in a social district. So I think there are businesses this may attract. I mean, I don't know, particularly the restaurants and other, I don't want to use the word bars, but other breweries and that type. So I'm really torn. I really have. I'm old school, and from the time I worked in the recreation department, I don't believe anybody ever saw me drink a beer in town. Since I've retired, lots of people have seen me drink a beer in town. But I think the effect on children, particularly as we see it during the festival time, and maybe Friday nights. I don't know how to, Friday nights, the streets are still open. That makes a big difference. So I'm probably going to vote for it, but it's with some real hesitation and my background in it. And I like what Wendy said, we can always revisit it in the future, but I would like to see the effect it would have on attracting and primarily restaurants. And I think it could help with that.
Thank you, Butch. Chris? Any
Well, I
comments?
will say I've done a lot of research on this over the past few years, going to some Main Street conferences and talking to various cities who've done this. A lot of the same concerns, Chris, that they've had. Public safety or their police departments have seen no increase in any type of problems, alcoholic problems or endangerment from, walking around or whatever. I have seen personally in some towns where retail establishments do benefit from a shop that's next to a brewery and people are in there shopping and that kind of stuff. So I think it's an idea that could really help boost where we are right now, and I think we should move forward with it.
Okay, any further discussion? I'll ask for a motion, and please do not read the two-page ordinance. I will ask you not to.
I'll make a motion to adopt an ordinance to amend the City of Morganton Code of Ordinances to establish the downtown social district.
I have a motion to have a second.
Second.
Thank you, Wendy. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, no.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. 4-1. Okay, next is the motion or consideration to amend the contract on Bethel Park Restoration Project. I'll call on Mr. Winkler to come forward and give us some information.
Okay, thank you. So as we've heard several times tonight, that we have increased costs that's happened over a short period of time and a long period of time. This project started over a year ago. We have so far sustained ourselves pretty well during this project. This one particular item we have asked for, or we've encountered some increase, and that is the bridges. So the amount, I don't have the total specific there,
181, 384.
Yeah, 181.31, okay. So that is, with the contractor in this process, they did not, when they bid, they did not have to have engineering on the bridges until after the fact. So once we got into this, we've got into some more specifics of the job. And there's sort of helicore pylons, things like that, structure-wise, that's come into play, along with, the setbacks of 2 storms during this process with the timing. And but we feel that the request is within reason, and that we feel also that we think we're going to still stay in the overall budget of the park.
Rob, thanks. What's the wish of council?
I'll enter a motion to approve change order number 1 to the existing contract with Baker Grading and Landscaping for the increased cost of Bethel Park Restoration Project. The amount of this change order is $181,384, bringing the new total contract amount to $1,741,251.50, and to authorize the mayor and/or the city manager to execute such agreement and any other necessary documents.
Thank you, Butch. I have a motion. To have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Wendy. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you, Rob. Next on our agenda is consideration of an amendment to the state cash flow loan agreement. Sally?
You'll recall that in March, you approved our ability to apply for a state cash flow loan, and this is back to Helene and some funding that has been made available to help communities who've had damage have available cash to get on with some of the restoration. At that time, and we've talked about this several times since then, the terms in that agreement were that once you received this authority and you received your money, when you received money or a reimbursement back from FEMA, you had to pay this back within 5 days. So basically, it gave you no cash flow help, right? Because we're still, as we've talked tonight, trying to get reimbursements for the money that we spent 10 months ago. Since that time, the treasurer's office, they have been great to work with. They have worked with us an awful lot, and another entity too, and they have come up with some different language. So you have an amendment tonight that basically will allow us to eliminate the 5 days and go back to the 5-year payback that we had agreed to, making it that once we get these dollars, they'll actually help us with our cash flow. They have told us that once we execute this document, and you had already executed the original documents, then they can close the loan with us and fund the cash flow loan of $5.4 million, I believe it is. So,
Thank you, Sally. What's the wish of council?
I'll make a motion to approve the proposed amendment to the cash flow loan agreement between the state of North Carolina and the city council of the city of Morganton.
Thank you, Chris. I have a motion to have a second. Thank you, Wendy. But I'd like to, I guess, talk about your involvement in this situation, because I think the state passed an agreement that was just virtually impossible for us to agree to, and you were able to.
well, I think they just didn't recognize the difference in trying to do something really nice and do it in a hurry, and in the field, the actual practicing of what they were trying to do. And we're probably a little further along than some of the other communities, and maybe a little more financially sophisticated is what I'm going to say. And I don't mean that in a derogatory sense toward any other community, but it became pretty obvious to us when we read the documents that we were going through the motions of getting a loan for help with cash flow that wasn't going to help. But they've been really receptive to talking with us and to working out something different, and that's super, very appreciative of that.
But this is one of the things that the treasurer pinpointed when he talked about how good the financial team of Morganton is.
So I have a motion and a
We'd
second.
like to think so.
He did.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Next is a resolution authorizing the city to submit a grant application to the Appalachian Regional Commission in the amount of $700,000 for water and sewer infrastructure. Sally?
Since Butch just did a motion to spend money, this is probably a motion he's gonna really like. So we have an opportunity to apply for some funding for water and sewer infrastructure on Albert Tron Boulevard that would help to support a $2.1 million investment needed to get water and sewer to the site of the new proposed hotel. And we have an opportunity to apply for $700,000 in grant funding to help fund that project. And in order to do that, we need your adoption of a resolution and your permission.
Motion to adopt a resolution authorizing the city of Morganton to apply for $700,000 in ARC funds for water and sewer infrastructure on Albert Tron Boulevard.
Thank you, Wendy. Do I have a second? Second. Thank you, Chris. Any discussion?
Yeah, I'll wait for the reception of the money.
Yeah.
When we
There
get
you
the
go.
money,
You receive it.
Okay, I think we have all the discussion. All in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye. Motion passes. Next is consideration of appointments to boards and commissions. We have a Board of Adjustment. We have 3 terms expiring, Thomas Ewer, Dale Britton, and Bryant Lindsay. The Board of Adjustment had 1 vacancy, a city alternate 2, which is council appointments. So what is the wish of council?
Motion to reappoint Thomas Eyre, Dale Britton on the Board of Adjustment for 3-year terms expiring on June 3rd, 2028, to appoint Joe Urban for a 3-year term expiring on June 3rd, 2028, and to appoint Bryant Lindsay to fill the city alternative number 2 position for a 3-year term expiring on June 3rd, 2028.
Thank you, Wendy. I have a motion to have a second.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Next is a Cable Commission City Council appointment. What is the wish of council?
I'll make a motion to reappoint Mary L. Roseborough to the Cable Commission for a 3-year term to expire June 1st, 2028.
Thank you, Chris. I have a motion to have a second.
Second.
Thank you, Wendy. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Community Appearance Advisory Commission. This is a mayoral appointment. There are 2 terms expiring June 30th, Liz Beach and Eddie McDempsey. I'm going to, we have 3 vacancies and no applications have been received for the Community Appearance Advisory Commission. So there are 3 vacancies on that board. Next is the Main Street Advisory. This is a mayoral appointment. I'm make a motion to reappoint, I'm going to appoint Stephanides, Bobby McCombs, and Nancy Van Oppen to the Main Street Advisory Board to 3-year terms expiring on June 30th, 2028. Reappoint Ashley Bruner to fill Marcus McCarthy's term expiring on June 30th, 2026, and appoint Catherine Christie and Adam McKay.
I think it's Mackey.
Mackey,
Is it
excuse me,
spelled wrong?
Mackey,
Yeah.
with terms ending on June 30th, 2028. Okay, and then we have City Council appointment for Planning and Zoning Commission. What's the wish of council?
Make a motion to reappoint Judy Francis, Hank Dickens, and Pete Wallace to the Planning and Zoning Commission for 3-year terms to expire on June 1st, 2028.
Thank you, Chris. I have a motion to have a second.
Second.
Thank you, Wendy. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Recreation Advisory Commission, we have a city council appointment. There are 3 individuals who have 3-year terms expiring. What's the wish of council?
Make a motion to reappoint Jose Alberto Garcia Villanueva, Stephen Grady, and Ken Grattan to the Recreation Advisory Commission for terms to expire on June 30th, 2028.
Thank you, Chris. I have a motion to have a second.
Second.
Thank you, Chris. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Under Human Relations Commission, it's a mayoral appointment. I'd like to appoint Ivy Steele, Patton High School student representative to the Human Relations Commission to serve during the 25-26 school term. I think, nope,
30-day notice.
30-day notice. We have a term on ABC Board. Member Mark Miller is expiring in August. That is the public notice that will be vacant in 30 days. Anything else to come before City Council? I want to thank all of you, and especially staff, for all the information. Hearing no objection, we are adjourned.